Good, well, I don't know. Good evening from the UK. Good morning, I imagine, or, well, what are you, 6 hours behind? I'm Monty Munford. I've been a writer for Forbes, The Telegraph, MIT Tech Review, Wired, you name it. Now I'm the co-host of a crypto/blockchain podcast called Blockspeak. We've had some great guests on the show. Unfortunately, John McAfee was supposed to be on next Wednesday for the fourth time. Although we are trying, me and his wife, to get him on the show. Anyway, enough of that. We have a very kind of tangled subject theme here to get through. I've spoken to the four gentlemen earlier, and we're going to try and split it into business and to DeFi and to regulation. But maybe we'll leave the regulation to the end. So I'm going to introduce you. I think you already know who he is. Is Miko Matsumura of Evercoin. So good. You're in San Jose, right? So you're.
That's correct.
So, rising DeFi. What is all this about? Is it? I mean, I know there's been a previous panel on the subject, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is an exchange panel. So the component of DeFi that's relevant here is AMM, automated market making exchanges, and this was pioneered by the Bancor folks, and obviously it's kind of gotten really big with Uniswap, and we did see some exciting action with SushiSwap and these other kind of alternative AMM models, right? But an AMM is really doesn't have kind of a classic order book scheme. So when we talk about decentralized versus centralized in the context of exchange, we're really talking about kind of mechanism of price discovery, which is sort of AMM versus, and I think that the scheme of centralized versus decentralized as this kind of, clash of the civilizations, I think it's really causes more confusion than it's worth. I think there's a lot of really interesting dimensions like the regulatory dimension. I think there's, anonymity is a dimension, and I think this biggest difference is really this kind of whether there's a centralized order book or not. And by the way, like you'll see so-called decentralized exchanges like IDEX and Ether Delta, which have order books. So, and order books are centralized. So I kind of say that that's not the most healthy conversation, centralized versus decentralized, but I do think that there's a lot of nuance to it.
Well, it's almost like a Manichaean or a Hegelian doctrine,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's behind me somewhere.
Sorry, I was just going to say in terms of the Hegelian element, like, we are actually starting to see things like custody moving decentralized and the order book staying centralized, so like there is a synthesis coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Jason, you keep nodding your head. Are you in agreement there, or are you in disagreement with our fine speaker?
I think Miko made a lot of great points. I'm generally in agreement. Most importantly, I think it's a very exciting space. It's a new experience, and it solves a unique pain point that I think centralized exchanges, for lack of sort of making that sort of that label clear, is that users do value certain things like self-custody. Users value things like anonymity, not doing KYC. But I don't think users fully understand what that means when it comes to a DeFi versus CeFi sort of boundary, right? There are borderline CeFi exchanges that also don't do custody. And you could argue that IDEX, like Miko mentioned earlier, is an example of something that crosses that line, right? Anonymity is another one that Miko mentioned. A lot of these DeFi, decentralized exchanges are not fully anonymous, right? You can, via the blockchain, figure out very easily who is trading what and against who. So I think users don't really get that quite yet. And so, I think there's still a lot of learning and exploration to be done here.
No, absolutely.
But exciting.
I think consumers, they don't really care how it works, as long as it works. I think, this mobile phone, I was kind of one of the early pioneers in mobile content, and we used to have these arguments about the technology, but no one cares about the technology. They just want to make sure it works. You've seen Sathvik over there in Bangalore or Bengaluru, a town that I've visited many times. You look like a Bollywood villain up against the wall. Someone's going to shoot you, which I have done in Bollywood films, personally, but that's another story. You seem to be agreeing with our fine friend there.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. Sorry.
You seem to be agreeing with Jason. You seem to be in agreement.
So I think I'll put it this way, right? So at one point we only had brokerages, a lot of brokerages where people can sell directly from the companies, and then we had the exchange. So when people started to realize that exchange means it's about bid and ask orders, and then the graphs and the charts and the depth, etc. I took little time for them to get familiar, but at the end, whether they go to the brokerage, they could get Bitcoin for USDT, or they could go for the exchange to get for USDT. But I think eventually we will have one more step ahead, where without the central party itself, just based upon the smart contracts, you are able to do that. But to what extent does it matter for the end customer, unless he's very specific about whether he need to really custody the funds himself? As of now, that is one of the big challenges, at least in India. So one of the recent surveys was showing more than 95% of the customers do not even hold any kind of self-custody wallets. Forget about hardware wallets. So given that, I think it is little far away. It will still take over a smaller period of time. And if you see the economy of India, or maybe the livelihood, so the money that they would spend per day basis, one transaction which is costing about say $12 to $15 is more or less the entire day's wages for a software engineer here, right? So given that, there's definitely challenging for it to become instantly popular, is what I think. So I mean, all three would coexist. It could be brokerage, or it could be the centralized finance, centralized platforms, or it could be the decentralized one. And when it comes to the institutions, I think they would be preferring more the centralized ones, because it will be more accountable. If something goes wrong, it's too tough for them to show the finger at a smart contract saying it messed it up, right? So I think when it comes to taxation and GSTs and getting the invoice and such, you of course need someone in between who actually takes it and gives the invoice. Yes, you have paid $10,000 and this is your own Bitcoin and is the invoice for it, right? So that becomes important, which is not possible through the decentralized methods, is what I think.
No, I understand. I interviewed for my podcast Blockspeak the CEO of Ledger yesterday, and he said that they on Chinese national TV they were basically saying buy cryptocurrencies, get ready for the digital yuan. Is it legal to trade crypto in India at the moment? I know things go up and down.
It was never illegal to trade crypto in India, but it was the central bank, which is Reserve Bank of India, that restricted the banks only to not provide their services for cryptocurrency exchanges and customers. So even though it is not an illegal activity within India, and this was the basis on which the community and all the exchanges through an association had to fight at the Supreme Court, which is like the highest court in India, to get that notice taken off. And that happened on 4th of March 2020. So since then, the banks have supported the cryptocurrency exchanges, and they are allowing the transactions to happen. So
right.
in India, we usually like kind of lagging. Yeah.
It's a bit like
your currency is like important.
A bit like your connection, it's lagging a bit. Thank you very much for that. Laurian, you come from a slightly different area, just maybe changing the subject slightly.
Sure.
Your experience is running a US federal market and then doing that across 50 states on a regulatory basis. I know we want to concentrate on business as well as regulation, but that sounds to me, I mean, we were talking earlier with Miko about Hegel. That sounds like something like a Aegean stable task to be able to try and clean up that mess. How did you do it?
I definitely have a large regulatory footprint, not one that I think others should envy. So what we do different at ErisX is that we run a spot market, and to run a spot market, you have to have registrations in the States and a New York bit license, and be FinCEN registered. And so we, based on our permissioning and our licenses right now, we have 50. And then we run it side by side with our federal futures market, which is what you would expect from a CME or an ICE. And to run a federal futures market, basically you have to comply with 21 core principles. Core principles on anything from governance to preventing disruptive practice to prosecuting bad behavior. And we made a decision early on that we're going to apply those same core principles across the board on the federal side and on the state side. That gives us clean prices. That makes sure, you know, our market is clean. It's running, it's well regulated, and then it allows us to build products on top of that, knowing that it's a well-regulated market with clean prices. And I think, you know, when you get into the whole DeFi versus centralized exchange conversation, and I think Sathvik hit the nail on the head there. I think the focus right now is really the retail market. I think the institutional market is going to have a real hard time adopting something like that. And to take it even a step further, I think regulators and, you know, the hardship that it is to get licensed with the SEC or the CFTC for a centralized market, I think it would be that much harder and that much farther away to get something like that licensed with those regulators. And I think that that's far off for the federal futures markets.
Well, I mean, that segues beautifully my next question to Jason, because, you know, you're regulated in the US and Japan, and are probably trying to be one of the first companies to apply and be accepted for a VFL or a virtual finance license in Europe. How was your experience of what's the kind of the journey that you've been on there? Was it easier in the US or easier in Japan, or is Europe clearly is a challenge?
Yeah, I don't think you know, going the path of being regulated, like Laurian said, is an easy one. There are choices you have to make and decisions and processes to build early on into your business to ensure compliance. And you know, for example, our Japan team, which got the license earlier this year, took a full 2 years to prepare and to develop systems and processes to enable sort of the Japan FSA to approve us for business.
2 years to prepare.
2 years, that's correct. Yeah, and we were fortunate to be the first sort of foreign business in Japan to obtain that license. So yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and you know, this is why you know, a lot of companies in our space have also complained about sort of the burden of regulation, right? So you know, there's pros and cons. I think institutions value the high standards that businesses that are regulated provide. Whereas, you know, on the decentralized front, retail users maybe don't care as much and are more willing to experiment and flock to some of these more innovative or different type of DeFi experiences.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Miko, back to you. What do you think about Jason's comments then? I mean,
I mean, I would say this is to kind of like split hairs between, you know, what's been said. And, you know, I think Sathvik's point is sort of more like centralized is favored by institutional. I think that, you know, in getting further down the road, like we are seeing solutions like Credo that enable things like non-custodial institutional. So, you know, what happens in institutional is that they do like to have an entity that they can do business with, you know, so there is a company to company relationship. So that implies centralized, but it doesn't always necessarily imply custodial, right? In the sense that you can set up a system where there is a non-pre-funded wallet, but there's some kind of proof of funds and there's some kind of fund staking or mechanism that enables them to trade, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that we are going towards synthesis, right? So I think it's not going to be a world where it's sort of these polarities of centralized and decentralized. And the axis that I think is really important is I think right now, I got in an argument on Twitter because I'm silly with a cartoon character, with an anonymous cartoon character who was claiming that regulators weren't going to regulate decentralized exchanges, right? And I think that you know, it's silly of me because, you know, you shouldn't argue with a cartoon. You know, my point is that regulators, particularly around anti-money laundering, like the regulators don't care. They don't care if you're centralized. They don't care if you're decentralized. That access doesn't protect anyone. Like the SEC cares, FinCEN doesn't care. FinCEN's like, are you facilitating money laundering? If so, we're going to round you up. So, you know, I don't think
Yeah.
so I think the polarity of it's fully centralized, it's fully decentralized, it's fully regulated, it's fully unregulated. These binaries are just confusing people, and I think it's going to cause people to get in trouble.
You know, absolutely. Laurian, I don't think you had a fair shout before, so I'm going to come back to you. I presume you've never argued with a cartoon character, is that right?
I have not, no.
But I don't think any of us have.
Smart man.
Well, I don't think that was your finest hour, Miko.
Twitter
really
does
wasn't.
that.
What do you think about what Miko's just said? Pretend you're not a cartoon character. Are we just getting lost in the technology here? The binary kind of nature of this alleged nature of decentralized, centralized, and I'm actually going to check the name of the panel. Liquidity, future exchanges. I mean, it sounds unnecessarily complicated to me.
I tend to agree with Miko that we are on a spectrum here, and what we have right now available to us in the quote unquote centralized market and the decentralized market is probably just a version of what we have today and what we're used to, but what it's going to look like in the future is not necessarily what it looks like today. And the centralized market may adopt and may implement things like what Miko referenced, and that might be a best practice, and that may be better than cold wallets and safes in a vault in a mountain in a forest guarded by guns, you know. And so all that to say, I think this technology is being contributed to, it's being innovative, it will be adopted by various aspects or various sectors of this industry in different ways, and I'm sure centralized exchanges will adopt best technology that makes it better or easier for them to do business, regardless of whether they're DeFi or centralized.
Well, so okay, fair enough. But what do you think the future exchanges are going to look like? You think it's? I mean, do you have any predictions there?
I think regulation is not going away. I think regulators only understand centralized markets. I think it's going to be an iteration of centralized markets, and it's somebody that you're going to hold accountable. I think it's a fallacy to think that if you run a decentralized market, no one's going to be held accountable. They will be. They will find somebody, and it'll be the person who least expects it. And unfortunately, when that happens, it's a red flag to the rest of the industry, and people run scared from that. So I think regulators are digging in their heels, and I think you know, there's going to be a big shift in this space in regards to that.
I don't think that. I mean, I don't think that the arrest of John McAfee is going to precipitate the hounds, the FBI coming around. But I do think that there's going to be a retro clampdown on ICOs in 2017. I think that someone smells blood somewhere, you know, and the SEC ruling against Kick and their coin, I think, has been has presaged all that. Jason, you're nodding with me. Anyone who nods with me, I go straight to them because they're obviously intelligent enough to understand. You are nodding. You agree that maybe there's.
I agree, and I think to Laurian's point, regulators are going to find and target things that they think are in violation, especially money laundering. I think that's a key one. And I think the lesson learned is it takes time for them to build their case, and it takes time for them to eventually come out and do something about it. 2017 ICOs are now, you know, over the past few months, we've seen sort of action related to that. And so, you know, as this DeFi craze is starting up right now or this year, it may take 2 or 3 years before we see some clarity around what is permissible and what isn't. Yeah, but I guess just to answer quickly on your point about, or your question about future of centralized exchanges, I think Laurian hits it on the head too. It's that will be this sort of synthesis and emerging of functionality. I do think that users today, retail institutions, are just more familiar with the type of interfaces and user experiences that we provide. And as such, I think we are sort of really well positioned to be that gateway to sort of this other world of DeFi and this sort of new technology, new use cases of crypto. So I continue to look for these platforms, our platforms, to offer this sort of DeFi gateway, or sort of this open the door to this new world for investors and traders.
Absolutely. Sathvik, you keep nodding away there. I don't know if you're kind of falling asleep or if you're still alive. I hope you're still alive. But we seem to all be agreeing with each other, and this is boring. Well, let's have a contrarian view. Sathvik, the future of exchanges, what are your thoughts? Please try not to agree.
So I think this way, right? So it comes to regulation, such things. So before 2010, everything that's happening through the bank accounts was completely traceable and whatever was happening. And then enters the Bitcoin and blockchain transactions, where there are only like anchor points, which are through the exchanges, where you can find some points in the track, but not every point. And through that, you could figure out who gave what to whom, or at least you can question them, right? So, but when as of now, we can see that the regulators have kind of got the grasp of how the Bitcoin and blockchain works, and they understand that not everything is completely traceable. Okay, so they have understood that, and that is a great improvement as compared to maybe 10 years ago. So going forward, maybe in about, say, a few more years, then the norms of what is possible and what is not possible in the decentralized exchange or the decentralized finance mechanisms. I mean, when that become popular, pretty much they will again have to start agreeing. But on the other side, what is a little bit more scary to me is that, at least when it comes to centralized exchanges, obviously, a person will put out the name, or a group will put out the name that they are the one who is running it. But just see like how Satoshi Nakamoto is hiding today, or at least he's not public today. In very similar way, for a lot of DeFi projects, the creators are anonymous. So it actually means that they are able to foresee something that could happen or go in the wrong direction that rest of us are not completely able to see. It could be that. So, I mean, I obviously, if let's say if you give me 5 Bitcoin to trade into some other currency, I would obviously go for centralized one today. Definitely not decentralized one. So it's only for experimentation purposes. It's good, but nothing beyond it, at least for right now. It should be like few more years for it to really mature and be stable and make it. I think so.
Okay, understood. We're kind of 4 minutes, so we're going to have like a minute each. I just wanted to ask you all one question. Hands up if you've had COVID. So you're all COVID free. It's not very nice. I'm telling you, it's not very nice. Whatever the president says, it's not very nice.
How did you catch it, Monty?
It was early doors, but I was really sick for about 4 weeks, and I called the doctor, and they said, drive your car to the car park of the health surgery. You'll receive a text message. When you get the text message, ring this number. A guy will come out looking like a Martian, put your hand out the window, and if you're positive, you'll be taken directly to hospital. And I was, I'd had it before, but it wasn't very nice. But that's beside the point. I just thought I'd try and shock you. It didn't work. Miko, you got 40 seconds to give our something amazing.
I'll take a quick disagreement with Sathvik, right? Which is, I think that he's saying that like DeFi isn't ready if he had coins to buy. Like, to me, I'm all about the Sharpe ratio. So like, I think people who are in a balanced portfolio should be considering DeFi assets, and they should be looking at them as high yielding, high risk assets, and so they should buy accordingly. This is obviously not investment advice. To me, DeFi versus CeFi is an illusion. And the question becomes, what's going to pop that bubble of illusion. And people have been arguing, the regulators will pop the bubble because they're going to regulate the DeFi guys. But I actually think the hot button is custody, which is, I think custody is probably going to pop the bubble. I think we're going to see self-custody and centralized finance, like an IDEX type of model.
Great,
we're going to see more of that.
Time. You're amazing. Thank you very much. Laurian, give me 40 seconds of leadership.
I'm going to break your rule, and I'm going to agree with Miko. I think custody is really where the next evolution is going to come in this market. I think that's really where it needs to come. I think a lot of cool things are happening there, but I really think we've had 400 years of centralized exchanges that have adapted to markets, market structure, market changes, blow-ups and failures, and have learned lessons that maybe crypto hasn't. And I think central marketplaces are not going anywhere.
Brilliantly, concisely said. Thank you. Jason, you're our penultimate speaker.
All right.
Give us something great to go out on.
I think, lastly, I hate to agree, but centralized exchanges are definitely not going anywhere, mostly because we enable the bridge between fiat, our traditional dollar-based or local currency-based world, into crypto, right? And so the DeFi space, as much noise as it's made over the past few months, it's tiny. It's tiny. It's small within crypto, but growing. And crypto is small within sort of the broader financial ecosystem.
You're
so centralized exchanges are not going anywhere.
Yeah,
and they actually plays a very, very important role.
Thank you. So thank you, Jason. Great. Goodbye. Sathvik, your final words. You've got about 30 seconds before I drag you all off stage.
So I'll see it this way, right? So whatever the discussion we are having is on one side of the fence. So we talk about brokerage or centralized or decentralized or what to use, what not. But when you see the other side of the fence where you have the common man and common people, for them it just is like not really mattering. All they know is what they give and what they get back, and they definitely are not prepared to do the self-custody. So I think at least we have more than a few years before the centralized exchanges will start losing its importance if DeFi really goes that way. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sathvik. These are one of these Zoom conferences where everything finishes on time. Instead of someone waving at me, I've got a ticker to the left. It says 14 seconds, 12, 11, 10. Thank all of you. You agreed with each other, which is annoying, but thank you for your time. Thank you for being part of this panel. I hope you learned something. I hope the audience have learned something. Goodbye, LA Blockchain Summit.